Let's record to the cloud and let's begin.
Quick question.
Yeah, what's up, Eddie?
When will we start working on that PowerPoint thing brought up?
You can start thinking about who you want to, or what you want to do it on immediately. As a matter of fact, I realized that I hadn't posted that this afternoon when I was putting my stuff together for class, and so I opened it up.
Does that feel like quiz 4 or?
No, that is a whole different thing. Yeah, and what I have planned is that for the week after Thanksgiving, that's what we'll do in here. Those 2 days, Monday and Wednesday after Thanksgiving, we'll play them. Everybody will take a look at your work. We'll learn something. So yeah, that's, but the deadline is just prior to that. So I can load all this stuff up. Okay, what you have?
The presentation has to be on campus that we did, or it can be artistry about any other thing.
That's correct. It's anything in before 1400. And we basically covered the world. We haven't covered it all yet. We've mostly been doing the Middle East and Europe, but anywhere in the world before 1400. And so if you want to pick something that's out of the book, that's fine. You kind of get a little bit of a head start with that because you got the textbook and you have whatever information they have there. But it doesn't have to be. Last year, I had someone who did a presentation on pre-Columbian Caribbean culture. And so Columbian era begins 1492, but she made a great presentation about some of the indigenous people of the Caribbean and their artwork, and it was really pretty good.
So that's our final project, right?
I'm sorry,
That's our final project, right?
that's your research project. There's only one quiz after that, but that's kind of a tell me what you learned in class. That's on the last week of class, but we come back from Thanksgiving. I believe we have 2 weeks left. 1 week is for these presentations. The last week is kind of
Do we have
recap.
assignments before the presentation though?
We have quiz 4 and 5, and I have been linking those quiz 4 and 5 to the presentations in the past. I was going through some of my stuff. So yeah, how do you feel about that? Can we do like quiz 4 as it relates to the presentation? So Carter, I'll get you as soon as I'm done. I didn't forget about you.
Okay.
But that's kind of what I did before was like quiz 4, give me the artwork you pick and explain why you picked that work.
Or we can just submit the rough draft that we are doing the presentation.
I'm sorry.
Or we can just submit the rough draft or the rough research work that we have done about, like, instead of doing a whole different essay.
Yeah, and see, that would have been quiz 5. Give me what I would call the transcript of, which is basically the summary verbatim. Or either that or put together your bibliography or something. So you okay with that? Linking quizzes 4 and 5 to progress on. How do the rest of you guys feel about that? Yes, no, maybe so. And usually that worked out. Okay, that usually worked out, but I did have some objections to that in the past on the grounds that Well, I didn't want to start so early. I wanted to wait till the last minute and put it together and, I think that's poor practice for one, So this was kind of a way to encourage doing it and using your time wisely. So, and it sounds like that's what you're thinking about too. Good. Carter,
When is Thanksgiving break?
November sometime.
Breakfast.
It's actually the third week of Thanksgiving. We got kind of odd situation where Thanksgiving is a little earlier than usual. Let me check on my magic 8 ball. I mean, my
I think it's from the 21st of November.
yeah, right. That's it. 21st through 25th. And the 28th and the 30th then are the 2 days of giving those presentations. Raylan, you're fast. Yeah, you're like ahead of me. That's good, right. See, it like being Thanksgiving being on the 24th, that's a little early. In fact, that's almost as early as it can be. Typically the last Thursday in November, but anyway, or whatever. But that's the timeline. That week, 21st to the 25th, we're not here. We come back on 28th, presentation week. And if you need to see that, if you go on the homepage on Canvas and you scroll down and on the left-hand side, the menu, click on simple syllabus. You got to scroll down on that, but I have the timeline on that all worked out. And it's on assignments too, so you can get that. And I've been kind of thinking about doing a little bit more as we get closer to showing you how to put this together. I showed you I have on the instructions how to turn a PowerPoint into an MP4 presentation. But there are other little things that when we get close, I want to talk about, like for instance, check for background noise. I've had somebody sounded like they were in the middle of the street. Obviously they had their window open, they lived on a busy road, and it was really weird. So another thing, please check your volume levels and play it and re-record it until you get it right. Another tip, look for the correct pronunciation of some of these people, places, and things. I do that myself before I come, but stuff like that. And I'm glad you asked that question. I'm glad all of you guys heard this, because yeah, I want these to be really good. And I want you guys to have these. I hope you keep them. Where I taught for 25 years before here was at Truman State University. And whether you heard about it or not the point. But one of the things that we did at that school as a degree requirement was to ask our graduating seniors to submit a portfolio. We call it the university portfolio, and it was samples of their work demonstrating different skills and demonstrating knowledge in various areas. So one might be a history, one might be quantitative reasoning, one might be analysis, stuff like that. having this kind of PowerPoint presentation would check off about 3 boxes on that university portfolio. It's not a requirement here, but it is something that if you wanted to put it online and you put it on YouTube or something, somebody wants to know, well, are you an organized person? Can you speak well? Can you do research? Just click it. Your goal, it does a lot. It's a professional level. That's why I've been going through this piece by piece, talking about things like legitimate sources and stuff like that. And sometimes you can have a really good presentation, but if it's based on unreliable sources, you could undermine your work. But okay, but I guess we'll talk about Romanesque art. How many of you guys, I just saw this last night. How many of you guys watch Channel 9 PBS television?
A little bit.
A little bit. Last night at 11 o'clock, they had some guy on there talking about the 1,000 years of the Middle Ages in Europe. And basically what he talked about was Europe from the fall of the Roman Empire up to the year 1000. And it was really cool because he was showing a lot of the same things that I already showed you and things that I will show you. And he got it all pretty much right too, which is always a good thing. But kind of introduce this today. When I was showing you manuscript illustrations or manuscript illumination, all of those things like from the Book of Kells, the Book of Darrow, the Igbo Gospels and stuff like that last week. And it was showing you Saint Matthew depicted in different ways from 3 different monasteries. This guy last night, he got this right on the money. He was talking about how the monasteries were kind of hidden far away and they preserved the culture, all of the art, literature, religion, basically survived in Europe in the monasteries. I said, yeah, we just talked. So anyway, before I get there, I want to kind of go back to this. This is, I hope it opens. There we go. And so here, this is a little thing on CNN. I found it last year. And as I've been talking about, they make discoveries like they're happening like almost daily, it seems. And so I wish that would give me a better there. Oh, come on. There we go. It says using radar. I don't want this. Pesky. Using ground radar, they found one of those Viking ships. I talked to you about that at Sutton Hoo and that Netflix film about titled The Dig. And so here's another one of those Viking ships, and they found this, and this is from CNN in London. And it's a high status Viking burial site featuring a feast hall, cult house, and the remains of a ship burial. And as I said at Sutton Hoo, we've seen this before. We've seen the Kofu solar boat that the leader would be buried in a boat and symbolically to carry their soul to the other side. And so anyway, this was like really cool. And it says that it shows an oval shape that researchers identified as a Viking Age ship. And then on top of this, where is that? And this is in southeastern Norway. Anyway, there was another, the late Nordic Iron Age, which lasted from 550 to 1050. So another one of those landmark years, 1000, that kind of ends the dominance of the Vikings as being the sort of the overlords of Europe, and it's the beginning of Europe. And looks like we're good. So here it is. Romanesque Europe from current slide. And this is what Europe looked like around, let me get that, 1100. This is 100 years. That year 1000 is kind of a big deal. But this is the Norman Kingdom, which is mostly England. This line right there, you see that? What's above that is Scotland. You guys ever seen the movie Braveheart?
Part of it.
Yeah, well, it's about William Wallace, who led the Scots in a war against England. England wanted to claim Scotland for themselves. William Wallace, played by, what's his name? Mel Gibson. Bottom line, this line here, though, pretty much follows where the Romans divided England, between England and Scotland. And there's a big wall here that goes from coast to coast. And it's called Hadrian's Wall. And the Romans built it because they couldn't mess with the Scots either. It were too much. And so anyway, you see these little vestiges of things from Roman times. And this is 1100. So we still have southern Spain in the Caliphate. This is still Muslim Spain. And we talked about the Grand Mosque in Cordoba. That's right here. Kingdom of France, Holy Roman Empire. I talked to you a little bit about that. We saw this little equestrian statue of Charlemagne. This is a time where the leadership, the ruler of all of this area in Central Europe and most of the Italian peninsula was kind of divided between military leaders and the Pope. And the military leaders like to call themselves emperors, and the Pope liked to consider himself the ruler of all of this. The guy in the show last night, by the way, called that time and called it a pontificate, which was kind of embraces both sides of that. So anyway, Gisselbertus, Last Judgment, West Tympanum of Saint Lazare, Autun, France, 1120, 1135. So what we had in the previous times, the late medieval, we had basically had churches that were built like fortresses, and we had the monasteries that were kind of far away. Well, after you get rid of the Vikings, Europe emerges. It emerges in a way that you would recognize today. And so Giselbertus, he was a guy, as a sculptor, we know who he is. And a tympanium, you know what a tympanium is? Tympanum, I threw an extra vowel, tympanum. That's this archway above the door, and it's typically decorated with low relief or high relief sculpture. This is marble and it's high relief because you can see the shadows in there. And you see here, this is Christ. Zoom in. Christ, we see the markings, we see the beard, and we see the Last Judgment. And what we're doing here is deciding who goes to heaven and who is condemned to hell. And so we have all kinds of things going on here, angels helping out. We have these people up here, which I'll talk about a little later. Those are donors, actually. You see all of these people down here, they're waiting their turn, but if they don't make the cut, they go straight to hell. And so this is it. This is the Last Judgment. And as I was saying about iconography that was developed in the Byzantine era, we have these symbols associated with particular figures in Christianity so that we recognize them. We can tell this is Christ for a number of reasons. First, his central position, and secondly, his theological size, but also the beard, the gesture, and if I could zoom in even more, I'm pretty sure you can see the wounds, but I don't think this will there. The wounds from the crucifixion. So there he is. And so the Last Judgment. And again, people in France at the time were largely illiterate. So this iconography was especially important to show, to tell the story of Christianity. And so this is one of the stained, this is a stained glass. And I believe it's from Saint Denis, but I'm not sure. I didn't mark it. But this is what happens here after Saint Denis, is that we start to see the appearance of much stained glass in Christian churches. St. Louis, King Louis IX, the guy for whom St. Louis is named. If you go down to the art museum, you see a guy in equestrian statue, St. Louis, and he's got a sword. He's on horseback and looks very majestic. He was a crusader. He was one of those military guys from Central Europe going to the Holy Land and wanting to reclaim the Holy Land, basically modern day Israel, Lebanon, parts of Syria, reclaiming that for Christianity. They were the Crusaders. And so anyway, this is kind of a different thing. I'm going off on a tangent here, just letting you know that the depictions of St. Louis and the reality of St. Louis are really two different things. St. Louis's incursions into the Middle East were in a lot of ways a fiasco. And the poor guy was deathly ill. He had dysentery, which meant that he had, excuse me for being gross, had persistent, constant diarrhea. And they talked about he had a throne that they carried with him that had a hole in it, so it's actually more like a toilet. Because his whole GI tract was all messed up with dysentery. And so anyway, it wasn't as glamorous as what you see here. But he's delivering the crown of thorns. Whoa. Crown of thorns, what's that from? From the crucifixion. Anybody that's seen a crucifix would see that Christ has that crown of thorns. Anybody that knows the story of the crucifixion of Christ knows that that's pretty much what he endured at the hands of the Roman soldiers. Crown of thorns. I talked to you guys earlier about Saint Helena, when Christianity was made the official religion of the Roman Empire, and Saint Helena, Constantine's mother, went to the Holy Land. They were looking for all kinds of relics of anything they could find. And they were talking about finding splinters of the true cross. Much of the things that the Crusaders and Saint Helena and subsequent archaeologists have tried to find, they've never found. Understandable. 2,000 years ago. At this time, it was over 1,000 years ago. But at any rate, he has been documented as believing that he had found a crown of thorns that was placed on Jesus' head. And that's him coming back from the Crusades and delivering the crown of thorns. So anyway, that's where they were at. That was medieval Europe. Reliquary statue of Saint Foy, which means Saint Faith, late 10th century, early 11th century. So it's around that time, 1000. Europe's making a revival. Reliquary, anybody know what that is?
I know the term and not the definition.
Okay, you've seen the term though, that's good. A reliquary is a place where you store relics. And in this case, I'm not exactly sure what's in this reliquary, but it wasn't just Jesus and the figures from the New Testament. They were actually keeping relics from all of the people they considered holy, which is why they're called saints. You, in the Catholic Church and Christianity, if you have achieved some measure through writings or deeds or martyrdom, you're considered to be holy. We know that you went to heaven, you are a saint. They still canonize, that's the term for it, saints even today. There's a church in Acton, used to be St. George's Church. It's called now St. John Paul II Church. The Pope from who died like what 20 years ago is now saint. Saint Mother Teresa. We still canonize saints, but what they did in these medieval times was they would keep stuff from this saint up to and including body parts. So there might be bones in this reliquary. There might be clothes, might be some other artifacts, but same thing. The crown of thorns, a relic, relics of Saint Faith. And so the interior of Saint Etienne, this is that Romanesque architecture. It really is kind of a precursor to Gothic, but it's called Romanesque because it uses a lot of the same architectural devices that were invented in Roman times. And in this case, it has columns, but they're mostly pretty short columns. We got some sculpted, look a little bit more like Roman columns with some kind of capital, but we have the archways. And this thing's built like a fortress. Again, they built their churches to withstand invasions. The attackers, the people could actually go into the church and lock it up, and the invaders, it would be safe from the invaders. The invaders couldn't do anything about it. And so anyway, you can see it's tall. One thing you don't see in Romanesque churches, stained glass. Romanesque churches use a lot of Roman architecture, and they don't typically have a lot of windows or stained glass. They're dark. And so this is the floor plan, and you can see here, been talking about this one for a long time. Ambulatory. I'm hitting this pretty much because it is a basic practice in many religions around the world, including Christianity, but in other religions, an ambulatory is a kind of a prayer activity where you circle, you walk around and say your prayers. And so this has an ambulatory, and you see that it's long and straight. Here's another Romanesque, the archways. I want to kind of point this out too. Folding chairs, as I said before, last week, we were looking at some of this. They didn't put pews in. And in fact, when they celebrated mass, funerals, whatever services, what you got, baby? Okay. So anyway, what they had here in those days was that people would stand. And if they had to kneel, they knelt right on the floor. And so anyway, and you see some little windows like up here and one behind the apse, behind the altar, and that's half circles called an apse. And this is 11th century. And here we go. A little bit of light coming in, not so much. Roman, and in this case, as I said, this is Islamic architecture too. We saw the archways at the Grand Mosque, the Great Mosque in Cordoba, and it has these this repetition of dark and light stone to produce this archway, and that's right out of Islamic architecture. And again, folding chairs. And so Saint Cyrin, Toulouse, France. There's something real different about this. This is moving toward the Gothic. But you see this, these two things are called transepts. They're like add-ons. And what does it do? It makes the floor plan take the shape of a cross. And that is something that will persist through Gothic architecture. So we see these changes, and you can see how this is really pretty substantial, but it's not quite the fortress that we would have seen 100 years prior. And this spire, and we've seen that kind of architecture, if you will, based on minarets in Islam, the idea of connecting heaven and earth, the idea of building high to the sky. And so, yeah, we're in the 11th century and there's floor plan. This is Saint Foy, the Saint Faith, the one that had the reliquary. And you see here, we got more in the way of light coming in here, but look at this architecture. Again, it's a fortress. You could hide in there. You could bring the city in here, lock the doors, and the invaders couldn't do anything about it. And so you see, it's the biggest, it's the most prominent building in the city. And I want to elaborate on that just a little bit. A lot of this architecture that we've seen through all of this time, all the way through the Parthenon, through ones, I got it. Through Hagia Sophia, through the Romanesque and the Gothic. There's a theory that says you can tell what a culture's most important concern is by the prominence of the buildings. Does that make sense to you? So in this case, Christianity is the most prominent part of this culture. It's the one unifying thing. It's the one that is the most important to all of the lives. But you can go to the Grand Mosque in Cordoba, and it is the most prominent building in Cordoba. You could see the Parthenon on top of the Acropolis, the highest hill and the most prominent building. Athena, the most prominent god. So religion to this point almost takes the top spot in all of these cultures as to what's important in those cultures. And then you have some of these things that are kind of hybrids, sort of like the pyramids at Giza, say, very prominent. We got, in that case, government pharaohs and gods, and they're both the same. So religion and government are really the same thing in most respects. And so this is a St. James, and we're starting to see some things happen here. Architecture, folding chairs, architecture is going higher and higher. We'll show you this. This is the early model where they would build the sides, the walls out of stone. They would build the roof out of wood. How many of you have heard of Notre Dame in France and how it burned down? Well, it's been like 4 years now, I think.
Yeah,
2019, yes.
I heard about that for the point.
Yeah, and the reason that burned is because it had this kind of roof. It was stone, it was high, and it had timbers on the roof. And on top of which, they determined that in order to modernize Notre Dame, they put electrical wiring all through this and hung lights through this and speakers and all kinds of stuff. And the electrical wires apparently got hot enough to set these timbers on fire. And of course, they were 800 years old, so they were nice and dry and just burned like kindling. So. And so, this is no accident too. This is in Compostela, Spain. And Spain enjoys a relationship with the Muslim world. Oh, Spain had enjoyed a relationship with the Muslim world. If I go back to this, and so this is,
I'm not sure that's right.
Yeah,
Because the only reason I'm saying that is particularly in Spain, I went to the mosque.
They're still mad about that.
oh, they are now, yeah, but I'm talking about like 1100.
my aunt lives in Cordova, and she's like.
Yeah, that is not.
Everyone's so annoyed, I don't know why.
Yeah. Oh, Eddie, I'm glad you brought this up, because, yeah, there are still hard feelings about this. Yeah, this is, and they're fighting over the Grand Mosque. But for about 600 or 700 years, they were in this, here's what I was trying to say, and I am so glad you brought that up. See, here's the Santiago de Compostela. And this is in the Christian part of Spain. This is 1100, 900 years ago. And this is the Muslim part, and there's Cordoba. And so what they had at that time, it wasn't like a lovey-dovey relationship, but the knowledge base and the technology and the literacy of the Muslim world was much far ahead of what was going on up here. And so that's what I meant by that. They had engineers and scholars and a lot of other architects that could help them and actually help them design some of the Romanesque churches that would be here. But you're right, some of these things, this is still mad about it. There's a, yeah, it's awful. It's yeah. But, and here's kind of the other part of this story. There was a guy from this part of Spain, and they call him El Cid, and he organized an army, and he was the guy to technically drive out the Muslims. But then Spain has a long history. Then they had what we call a Spanish Inquisition, where they were just torturing and trying to get rid of anybody that was not Christian at all. So yeah, it's a thing. And so we're getting real close to the Gothic period, but I do, oh, here's a monastery, Saint Pierre, Moselle, France. One of the things that happens after the Vikings stop threatening, monasteries start to proliferate. They start setting up monasteries all over Europe, and they become much more accessible. They make a lot of money, as I said last week. You're quite a spectacle, you know that. Oh, you guys will have grandchildren someday. And I can see by the smiles on your faces, you will be good grandparents too. But at any rate, what we have here is this monasteries start developing, and they become less like fortresses and more like palatial grounds. And so, yeah, this is the historiated capital, which means that it tells a story. And let me see, I want to kind of this is just some purchase. And yeah, I thought I had a better zoom in on that. Yeah, the wounds of Christ. Can barely see them, but okay. Romanesque. This is a place in Syria. This was built by the Crusaders. It still exists, but you can see a fortress. They have a bridge to the access way here. Bottom line, that's a Roman bridge with the archways. But a fortress, again, warring people. And these are some of the ways. I want to see how far I got on this. Yes. What time is it? Well, you know what? Tympanum, that's that place here. It's over the doorway on the sides, the jams. And these are the areas that as we'll see, beginning in Romanesque times and into the Gothic, become much more decorated. And so what we see here, and I just want to kind of point this out, is that really within just a couple of 100 years, they went from no decoration inside or out. You don't see much decoration here. You don't see frescoes, you don't see sculptures, you don't see anything except the architecture. We got a few stained glass windows behind the apse. But here, I mean, these are fortress churches. Fortress churches. And then we get to here, and this beginning 12th century. This is the beginning of when they start to decorate the exteriors of the building. So what does that mean for us? That means that there's a lot more artwork to look at. There's a lot more sculpture. They refined their iconography. And so anyway, I can't compete. She's just too good. Oh, by the way, part of the reason she's late, I had to go pick her up and sign her out from school. Did you guys hear about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, she goes to St. Louis Public Schools. Everybody was on lockdown today.
Yeah,
Maybe-
because of the shootings, right?
Yeah. And she goes to school not far from there. She goes to Sticks, which is in south central West Bend. Hey, fist bump, baby. You got poke it in it. There you go. What? Oh, thank you. Yeah. And so I kind of built in, I want to just end this. And let me get to modules. I got to see where I'm at with the modules, but I think I built in some time here that this is what we were looking at, and this is today. And I got Gothic in Northern Europe, and this and late medieval. So. Yeah. Well, I kind of led you in through the end of the Dark Ages today. And when we come back, I'll show you the rest of what happened in Romanesque. And basically, that's what that guy on Channel 9 talked about last night, too. The Dark Ages to this emergence of modern Europe. And so we can pick that up if you don't mind, or I can stay here and talk. Despite despite all the competition. How about our guys at home?
Yeah.
What do you say? Oh,
He says, what do you think we should do?
well, yeah, it's just not the first time we've been here. She wants to go to Starbucks.
She works at Starbucks.
Oh, yeah. You going to work right now?
But isn't she scared? Yeah, she looks scared, right?
I can't stick in her hair or not.
Now she's not taking it.
Okay.
Is
Is
he
full kid
scared?
scared?
Yeah, he's scared.
Well,
Ow.
I'm thinking this. I got to show you enough Romanesque
Is my mushroom scary?
and
Is my mushroom scary?
pull it right to your. Question about the presentation. And since I just put that in, I'll show you where this is at now. See, I published that, so you guys can take a look at it. I can give you some 20 minutes right now or whatever. Spend your time wisely. And Eddie, you're so right about that. There's a 1,000-year hatred of it.
I do not, I mean, like, my best friend back in Utah, he lived, he was born and raised in Madrid. And he came to Utah like 3 years ago, so I went to stay with him. And even he doesn't like them, and I was kind of confused.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really, really conservative.
That's really, oh, yeah, I know, it's,
They hate.
I know.
There's a lot of like. Conflicting interests.
Well-
I can understand why Europe doesn't want, or doesn't like that now. Like it makes sense because the Muslims kind of conquered everything for a little bit. It got taken back and people didn't forget.
yeah, it sees. I believe it's like this. I might be wrong, but I think that when these kind of hatreds persist generation after generation, we almost forget about what the original hatred is about. It just gets taught to the
Yeah.
next generation and that's heartbreaking. That's but anyway, I say, let's call it a day. Let's see, end meeting for